Welcome back once again to PDM Vlogs. My name is Sam, and today's video was inspired by a YouTuber called Mark Holtz, or Holtzy. I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm a big fan of his, and you should definitely go check him out. He did a video on his Sony Hi8 camcorder, which I believe is like 23 years old, and inspired me to do one on this. This is the Sony CCD TR8E video camera recorder. That's what it says on the bottom there. This camera is at least, well, I believe it's almost 30 years old, if not 30 years old itself. I can't find a huge amount of information online about it, but I had to do some research based on when things came in, and I'm pretty sure this is from about 1990, maybe 1991, but I thought 30-year-old camcorder, that has a nice ring to it, so we'll just say it's 30 years old, but it might be like 29, 28, so I am sorry if that's the case, but we'll call it 30. This has been in my family since probably 1990, 1991, something like that. It was bought by my granddad, I believe, for filming holidays, but he always used to crack it out at Christmas and birthdays, and I think there's video footage of me learning to ride a bike on this thing. Not on this tape. Half the tapes have disappeared because we've moved house a couple of times since then, but hopefully they are in storage somewhere. It'd be nice to dig them out. But a lot's been filmed on this, and this was actually the first camera or video camera that I ever used. So the first Lego animations that I did, because I've got another channel which has got Lego animations, so if you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the description. The first ever stuff I did was on here, literally just pressing start stop on the record button and making Lego animations and things with bionicles and that sort of stuff. As I said, it's been in the family for absolutely ages. It's been used for all sorts, and it's nice to dig it out again. I'm feeling quite nostalgic using this thing. So over the years, I have had numerous cameras. I've had mini DV camcorders, an HD camcorder, DSLRs, and of course my GH5 mirrorless, and I've used a bunch of other stuff. But as I said, this is what started it all for me. This is what started my interest in filmmaking. I wanted to do all sorts of movies with it. And this was before editing software was really widely available, so I'd literally just have to edit and film in camera, like the good old days. Things have come a long way since then, but it's just nice to go back to my roots and play around with the thing, I think, that sort of started my love affair with filmmaking. So the first thing you'll notice is there is no flip out screen. This is how I know it's older than sort of 20 plus years. This is one of the earlier sort of Handycam models. I think there was one or two that came before this, but this must be maybe the second or third generation. So yeah, potentially looking at 1990, 1991, something like that. So all it had was this viewfinder, which does move around, which is kind of cool. And then there's a little black and white screen, which you can kind of see there. I'll throw in a close up, and then it's magnified by this eyepiece, which actually isn't supposed to come off, but I think it got broken. I can see there's a space for a screw, but it seems to hold itself in place. So it takes a slightly older version of the Sony NPF batteries. I haven't tried it with any modern ones, but theoretically they should work, but they might not work as well as I'd like, so I'll have to try a few things out. But actually I was quite amazed at how much charge these batteries still hold. They'll still hold just under an hour, which these are the smaller ones, these aren't the giant chunky ones. It's quite impressive. This camera takes Hi8 tapes, which are 8mm in diameter. It will also play back Video 8 tapes, I believe, which is the previous standard. Backwards compatible, which is really useful. So if I'm transferring a client's old video tapes, I can do the older version as well, which is useful. And this is, of course, being, well, no, not in the EU, being in the region that uses PAL. I would have said EU, but obviously Britain decided to leave, so whatever. But being in a region that uses PAL, this shoots at 50i or interlaced at a resolution of approximately 640 by 480. It's not exact, but it's about 640 by 480, something like that. As you saw at the start of this video, it has this really satisfying tape function or tape ejection thing. And you take the tape out, ta-da, and then put it back in. And it doesn't close as well. There we go. So it also has a built-in lens cap, which I don't know if that's popping open. Oh, it did pop open, there we go. Has a built-in lens cap, and more amazingly, it also has inputs for a headphone for monitoring audio and also playing back if you're not plugging into a TV, as well as a 3.5-inch mic jack, which I have tested and it does work. So that was pretty cool. And then on the back, we have video out for the AV, which you've got the yellow, the white, and the red. And then you've also got S-Video, but I don't have an S-Video cable, but you can do S-Video. And then, of course, there is also a full-size tripod mount on the bottom, which is useful. So now I'm going to switch over to this camcorder, and you can see what it looks like in some kind of studio setting, and I'll explain the whole capture process that I've got set up, which is a bit more involved, but I think the results are worth it. And here we are. This is the camcorder in action in a studio setting. So the way I've got it set up is I'm using the camera's AV out. That is going into an HDMI upscaler. I've set it to 1080p, which might be a little bit overkill, but I just thought, you know, best be safe than sorry, just save as much quality as I can. That then goes into an Elgato Game Capture HD, which is capturing at 25 frames a second. And I've always thought the color reproduction and the bitrate is pretty good off that. And then I'm also running an HDMI out into a monitor just to my right. And the Elgato is going into OBS and recording at 1440 by 1080 at 25 frames a second in .mov format. And that's basically it. It's a bit overkill, sure, but I think the quality you get from it is far better than what you get from those USB transfer devices. So the ones I'm talking about are the ones you get off Amazon, where it's kind of like, I don't know, they'll have some brand name like Sparkle or something. And I've just found the quality to be lacking, really. And I've just never found it to be good. Well, not good, just not good enough. You know, you often find it's only really capturing sort of, if a capture device is capturing in 480p, you're still downscaling that. You know, you don't want to lose quality on something that's already not exactly super high. So I've found that they introduce a load of interlacing and artifacting, and I just don't like what comes out of it. So I thought an HDMI upscale and a proper capture card, I just thought would do a lot better. Now the one thing I am noticing is it's quite dark. I'll bring up the brightness a bit. It's quite dark, and I think that's because the auto exposure is trying to focus on this light. So I'll see if yeah, look, there we go. See, you turn that off and then now it's all working. So, okay, this is, that works a lot better, goodness. It obviously is not going to hold up to 4K or HD or anything like that. But actually, I've been quite impressed with the quality I'm getting off it. And again, I think partly due to the capture method. But I think the difference between Hi8 and Mini DV is not that huge, not enough for you to really notice. What I'm mostly noticing is actually just in how the tape I'm using right now is quite old, and I'm finding that I'm getting little marks and stuff off just the tape being old. But the actual quality and the video quality, if you don't count those bits, is surprisingly decent. And what's more amazing is it does okay in low light, considering this doesn't have any kind of infrared, like, you know, night light or anything. It does all right. And the other thing as well to remember is this was designed for, you know, 80s, 90s, early 2000s CRT screens, which are standard definition. And I always remember that the quality coming off this in those screens looked pretty good. They weren't designed for, you know, these, you know, LCD screens in 1080p and 4K. So actually the quality at the time was decent, and there wasn't a lot of difference apart from if you're shooting on film or something. You know, the kind of consumer or prosumer camcorders, all the quality was pretty much the same across the board. The one thing I have noticed though is the color looks quite desaturated. You especially notice it in the blue sky, and I can see it in my t-shirt. It's not terrible, but it's just, I noticed the color's a bit mushy. Of course, dynamic range is really limited. You're probably only getting about 4 or 5 stops if you're lucky. Probably to be honest, only 2 or 3. I noticed, especially on highlights in sort of bright light, it just completely clips. But I did notice that in the shadows that I was getting arguably sometimes more detail than some phone cameras. Maybe not the super modern ones, but like from a few years ago, I think as far as what it's actually capturing in the dynamic range was pretty decent. You know, considering this isn't doing any kind of wizardry in the kind of software or anything, it's just what it's capturing. I think that's quite impressive considering, again, 30-year-old camera. I will say the lack of a flip screen is kind of annoying, but I can't really hold this to that because flip screens didn't really come around until sort of the mid to late 90s, but it's still kind of irritating, although I do find that, you know, if I just hold it in front of me, I generally know it's going to kind of be in frame. But it would be nice if there was some other way of monitoring stuff, so this is why I've got it connected via, you know, AV cable and HDMI into my monitor. But yeah, the lack of a flip screen is kind of annoying, and I did sometimes wish that my granddad had traded up, but you know, whatever, it's still nice to have a camcorder. There also aren't a huge amount of manual focus options now. I suppose that's not really to be expected on sort of a mid to low level consumer camera. It has a little bit of option to sort of brighten the image, and it does actually have a 37mm filter thread, so I could in theory attach my ND filter. But I will say actually the auto exposure, as you saw just then, was pretty good. It sort of reacted pretty well, and considering again, nearly 30-year-old technology, it does quite well. If you look at the footage that's hopefully on the screen now, you'll see, it reacts pretty quickly and it looks fairly natural. And actually, I've got to say the same for the autofocus. Again, you obviously don't have the same like shallow depth of field that, some of these bigger sensors have, but it does pretty well, and it seems to generally know. It doesn't hunt too much, I found. Obviously better light and everything, but yeah, I was considering again, autofocus is like this huge thing these days, and they seem to kind of, I guess, just because of simplicity, they just kind of got it right pretty well in these older cameras. But I've got to say, one of the most impressive things about the entire camera has got to be the onboard microphones, and I'm going to switch over to the onboard microphones now. So, right, this is with onboard audio. I've switched this off, hopefully. And certainly in my experience, I've found that, yeah, the quality's pretty good. On the microphones, as opposed to cameras today, and I think I would say they do rival some cameras today in some regards. Obviously, the camera's making a bit of noise, and that's just, that's the tape and everything. But because they're bigger, there's a lot more room for sort of dynamic range and stuff. I noticed the bass end especially did surprisingly well, and it even cut quite a lot of wind noise, which was, quite impressive, really. So if you were filming with one in today's society, you might find that actually the onboard microphone does pretty well. It's certainly a lot better than a lot of phones, and the HD camcorder I had a few years ago, which I had to sell, the onboard microphone on that one was pretty rubbish, well, comparatively. And actually what's been on here, and actually generally that seems to be a thing with the Sony camcorders, not all of them, but a lot of them, they do provide good onboard microphones. So I think it was actually quite good that they weren't. This was before the kind of thing of everything has to be tiny and like recessed and everything. The microphones, yeah, they're pretty decent, all things considered. Why would you want to use a camera like this when you can just drop like a filter or like a like a VHS filter on your footage? And sure, you can do that, and that looks pretty decent, but it doesn't quite look the same. It's certainly not as authentic as using the real thing. You don't get the same kind of color reproduction or the motion, and especially if you're using a phone, if you're trying to zoom in, the digital zoom, especially like doing a pencil zoom, is not as natural as using a proper like zoom rocker, and it's not optical as well. So yeah, I think if you're trying to get that look, and I'm planning on using this again for another music video, funnily enough, because it'll just look a lot more authentic than if I was to just use like the GH5 on my phone, because the filters, while good, you can still tell. One of the biggest examples I can think of is Paranormal Activity 3. It's supposed to be filmed on a camera like this, or probably one of the bigger ones actually. It's sort of filming direct to VHS, I think. And obviously they can't, it's not like the Blair Witch Project. The studios need a minimum quality, but like the filter they put on it is pretty rubbish, and it just kind of, after a while, it just disappears, and it just doesn't look good. And I've never seen, I have seen some that look alright, but I generally would rather just shoot, and if it was practical, and it's not that impractical to use it, I would much rather just use the real thing and get the most authentic result. So the other reason to use it, I think, would be, certainly for me, I grew up, when I was sort of learning to film, I grew up with disc one, and I grew up with like mini DV, and basically the cameras where you're recording to tape and you have to actually capture in real time. Yes, it was a bit cumbersome, but actually it made you appreciate, one, limitations of tapes and everything, and two, actually patiently, and it meant you actually went through the footage rather than just kind of copy it over and then checking it at the time. For anyone who hasn't experienced that and who's only used smartphones or sort of modern cameras like good old GH5 here, I think it is worth experimenting with older cameras like this. And I think the next thing I'd like to do is to try and use like Super 8 or Super 16mm film, just to kind of appreciate how things have progressed. Because I think, I worry that, and I think people in the industry probably think this, that we're going to kind of, it's all well and good that technology gets better and it helps more people create, but I think it's really good to have a technical understanding, not just of like manual focus and everything, but of where technology was and the limitations that were there, and then I think you then have much more of an appreciation for how accessible things are. Because I know even back when I was, 12, 13, so this is probably 2005, so about 15 years ago now, like a camera like this for what, £2,000 is probably only about £1,000 now, would just be, I just could never imagine that. I always wanted to get the film look at a young age, and I always thought camcorders, why they just look so much like video, not realizing of course that, at the time, Super 35 film was horribly expensive and the camera's like 100 grand. And then now obviously, you're getting people who are shooting huge commercials with something like that. But I just, I know I'm kind of waffling here, but I really do think it's worth everyone who's interested in filmmaking trying out using an old style camcorder or anything that isn't kind of digital camera, pop out the memory card, in and done. I think it's good to try some old tech, because I think, yeah, really makes you appreciate what we've got today. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I'm still on the camcorder. I'm quite enjoying the look, and I keep noticing myself on this big monitor here. And we're now trying to upload to this channel every Friday or Saturday. So subscribe if you haven't, notifications on, all that good stuff. Like the video if you liked it. If you didn't, that's fair enough. I'll see you in the next one. And yeah, goodbye.